3 non-creepy ways to make women start thinking about sex. I'm going to start out this video by discussing with you guys indirect ways to start bringing this up in conversation. Then in the second point, we're going to be transitioning into more dirty or naughty words you could actually start using in the conversation to kind of spark that imagination. And then in the final point, I'm going over some more advanced, subtle concepts and phrases that you could be saying line for line in the interaction to create a really powerful result. So watch this video in full. Let's get into point number 1, the first non-creepy way to start making the girl think about sex, which is you talk about sex. However, there's clearly a right way and a wrong way to introduce this into the conversation. So initially what you want to do is actually talk about sex in a very indirect way. And it doesn't even need to be the idea of you and the girl having sex. It doesn't need to be you having sex. It doesn't even need to be anything around that concept. However, you can subtly start to talk about these things in a very, very subtle, indirect way. And that's the part where I think a lot of dudes get this wrong, is that they think that by bringing up the idea of sex, that they're coming off as like that thirsty guy or that pervy guy or that creepy dude who's like thinking about sex. And you're right in a sense that if you were to just blatantly dump the idea of me and the girl having sex or having some level of like sexual interest in the girl just out of nowhere, yes, that is creepy. You're 100% right. However, the right way to do it is to be able to just have a normal conversation with the girl without having a crazy filter on the topics of conversation, and also being able to communicate to the girl that you're a dude who clearly has sex and is sexually confident. And the problem with a lot of nice dudes, I noticed that the way they talk, their body language, the topics of conversation, they're very stiff and they're very tense. And they have a tendency of talking with a filter. They're very like in their head, and there's a filter when it comes to the topics of conversation. And for that very reason, you kind of sub-communicate in the conversation. Probably you're communicating that you're a dude who isn't that sexually confident, who most likely hasn't had that much sex or success with intercourse and women. And for that reason, it kind of creates this dynamic between you and the girl of just staying on very safe topics of conversation. So the way that we fix this is by practicing this, guys. We want to subtly start talking with less of a filter in the interaction. And we also want to be aware of the topics that we're talking about, because if we can start to strategically inject more topics of conversation around the ideas of fun, adventure, spontaneity, things that are devious or trouble or crazy, or maybe things that are a little bit taboo or naughty, even as we start to build this up, you can start to see that just by doing that, it automatically starts to introduce conversation that's starting to flow in the right direction that we want to. And that's how you're actually going to get her to think about sex. It's not that you're going to tell her, me and you are going to have sex tonight. Oftentimes when you try to force the topic on somebody, they'll try to resist the thing. But when you're talking about topics indirectly that are somewhat correlated to actual sex, well, that's what starts to kind of get the imagination flowing and gets the girl thinking a little bit more about these topics. And that's the whole point of this video, right? Well, how can we do this? There's a variety of different ways, and you really want to just start to get in the habit of talking without having this super politically correct conversation. So I'll give you an example. I had a client recently where we were breaking down his interaction. He was talking to this girl on a date about her dog, and they were at the dog park, and he was actually telling this story about how his dog goes crazy at the dog park, this and that. And it was still a very safe conversation. But what I noticed was he was talking with this filter around telling the story. And I paused the interaction and I told him, I said, hey dude, you know how I would actually tell that story? Because he was pretty much talking about how his dog was like running around like uncontrollable, trying to like out alpha the other dogs at the dog park. And I said, dude, you know how we could have spiced this conversation up, or how I would have told the story? I would have literally just mentioned that my dog at the dog park runs around trying to out alpha the other dogs, and he literally has like a fucking humpathon with the other dogs. It's like he's trying to claim his masculine alphaness on the other dogs, and so he's literally just humping the dogs running around, and I need to literally pull him off of the other dogs. I'm like, dude, stop, no humping, right? And it's funny, but as we're having that conversation, you could then even ask the girl about her dog. So is your dog the humper or the humpy typically, right? And even though it's a funny thing and it's not actually about sex, what is it communicating? It's communicating that I'm just free in my conversation. I'm free in the topics. I'm free when it comes to not having judgment or being unapologetic about saying certain things in the conversation. And none of this is that creepy or risky because it's funny and it's indirect. Like clearly we're talking about dogs here. And that's just one example. So when it comes down to it, guys, it's really being able to say the thing in an unapologetic, I'm not embarrassed, I'm not wondering what your judgment's going to be about the whole thing, and I can just freely say it, and it's funny. Now look, that one story is not automatically going to get the girl to start thinking about sex, but that one story now allows me later on to tell a slightly more risky or slightly more devious or slightly more crazy, adventurous, spontaneous thing as the conversation and the interaction builds up. So again, it starts off super indirect, and as the conversation goes, we can then go to a slightly different or crazy topic, and that could be something like, we're talking about vacation. What's the most spontaneous thing you've done? What places have you traveled to? Have you been on vacations recently? From that could be, what's like one of the craziest things you've ever done on vacation? And then as we're talking about vacation and we're talking about different locations, and I talk about one adventure I had on vacation, I could then ask her, what's one of the craziest things you've ever done on vacation? And there's no judgment, by the way. I don't give a fuck. I'm just curious. Have you done anything fun or crazy? And again, just because I asked that question does not mean the girl's gonna say, yeah, I had this one night stand in Cabo. She might bring up some kind of sexual thing just because of my vibe and the no filter and the no judgment that I'm talking about these topics. But even if she doesn't, again, she's going to answer the question, and then I could either diss her or tease her on the idea that it's kind of like this boring, stale, vanilla thing and that she needs to be a little more risky, or I could then tell a story that's like one step up from what she did, or maybe even a half step up from what she did, and again, it's just starting to build up. Another easy thing you could do is you tell a story about a friend of yours or something that happened on vacation that was almost unintentional that ended up being a little risky or a little devious. Because by telling the story and it being your friend, it's not actually something you did, but it still nonetheless introduces that topic of conversation into what I have going on with me and the girl. So it's a very safe, subtle way to inject a more risky conversation topic, even though it's not risky since I'm putting it on my friend. And so these are the topics you want to start playing around with when you're in the interaction. If you're trying to spice it up and stretch out of that boring, friendly, bland, predictable conversation topics, it could start out with, what do you do for fun? Or where have you traveled? Or what place would you want to go on vacation? And then from those, it could lead to, well, what's like something like crazy that you did? Or what trouble, have you ever gotten in trouble for something before, for doing anything like really bad? Or it could be, what's the craziest thing you've done on vacation? Or what's one thing you like always wanted to do but you were kind of like afraid to do? Okay, so just start thinking about topics and how I can add in crazy, fun, spontaneity, trouble, deviousness, things that are taboo, things that are like one-off things that you would never do again. And before you know it, guys, you could even end up talking about a conversation around the craziest place you ever had sex before. Now, look, the thing is though, if just out of nowhere we're talking about the weather and I'm talking about the food and I say, so like, what's the craziest place you ever had sex? Whoa, dude, that's fucking creepy. Okay? But if we talked about having fun, having too much fun, going on vacation, spontaneous trips, craziest thing we've ever done on vacation, story that my friend did on his vacation that was like pretty wild, but I was invited to that vacation and I almost felt like I missed out, to what's one thing she did on vacation that she regrets, or most trouble she's ever gotten into, or most devious thing she's ever done, you know, and there's no judgment. And then you tell the thing, and now we're talking, somehow sex gets brought up like indirectly in one of these topics, and then like craziest place you ever had sex. Dude, we're actually talking about sex, but like look at that transition. And again, it doesn't need to go exactly in that order where I just ask question after question after question. Ideally, you're sprinkling in things in between, and these are kind of like bursts going throughout the conversation over the course of like 1, 2, maybe even 3 hours. So you're not just going all of them, because then it's gonna seem like you're just trying to push in that direction. The conversation should have a natural flow to it, and when the girl's engaged or she's telling you something, you could ramp it up a little bit more. Some time goes by, we change topic, that leads into a story of a place I traveled to, which leads into a crazy time on vacation, which leads to me asking her what the craziest thing she ever did on vacation. And then it could go back into small talk about travel, and like later on it could again have another burst. So just like physical escalation or verbal intent escalation, it's not that I just touch her, then I touch her here, then I touch her here, then I'm moving closer, then I kiss her on the cheek, and then I kiss her. They're bursts that happen in small increments throughout the conversation, and those times in between is what actually makes it feel smooth and natural and gets the other person accustomed to the touch that's going on. So when it comes to sexually escalating the topic of conversation, again, it's done very indirectly at first, just like a light touch or a high five or a hug is very light and indirect. And over time, it slowly ramps up. Okay, so that's one way that you can start to escalate the conversation topics, starting off super indirect and slowly ramping that up. Now I want to talk about a completely different technique, which is the idea that you could start using more words that are oftentimes correlated with sex. And you don't need to necessarily use them in a sexual way initially, but you can start using these words because a lot of them are just correlated with sex one way or another. You're not going to use this whole list in a conversation, but I just want you guys to start thinking about these words and how you can start maybe using a 1, 2, or 3 of them if there is an opportune time in a story. Because again, everything I'm showing you guys here is just showing you how to become more comfortable talking about sexual topics, using words that are often correlated with sex, and being able to communicate in a way that's less stiff or restricted, which is what most nice dudes are doing. Again, it sub-communicates you're not a dude who's really successful with women. You're not a dude who is having sex frequently. All right, and that's really what's stopping the girl from thinking about sex with you. If you're watching this video, you most likely want to get the girl more aroused and more enticed around the idea of sex. So it has everything to do with your communication and your vibe. So that's why I'm going over this stuff. So let's get into the list of words that are oftentimes correlated with sex that you guys can start sprinkling in throughout your conversation wherever you see fit. And it starts out with words like hot, sexy, lust, desire, pleasure, erotic, heat of the moment, doggy, throbbing, naughty, or fingering. And if you notice all of these words, again, you don't want to say them in a way that's obviously talking about sex. I'm not going to say, yeah, look, I'm going into my pocket. Look how I'm like fingering my pocket right now. Like, that's weird. Okay. But I promise you, if you somehow found a way to use the word fingering in a story, as long as you say it without having sexual intent between you and the girl, again, it just shows that you're a dude who's confident with his words. And you know what it also implies? If you can talk a certain way and use these words pretty freely, it kind of implies you're a dude who most likely would be good with dirty talk. Like, that's really what it is. Like, and think about what dirty talk is. It's using your words, your vibe, and your delivery to get the girl more wrapped up, aroused, and turned on sexually. So literally, what I'm showing you guys is like indirect dirty talk, which can be used in conversation. And that's actually non-creepy ways to get the girl to start thinking about sex. So everything I'm saying is confirmed that this is the way to do it. And the important part is the delivery and what you're using it on. So again, I don't just say, damn, like, you look sexy as fuck. That's too much to say that initially. I could get away with that later on in the interaction if things have been heating up and, you know, maybe we've even kissed, she's getting more turned on, the physical escalation's at a certain point, she's kissing me. There's a time and a place where I could say that and it would make sense and it wouldn't be creepy. You say that up front, it's gonna be creepy. However, you could say that a lot earlier on in the interaction and get away with it because it's done indirectly. And what that might look like is maybe we're talking about a movie that we both enjoyed. I used to have the biggest crush on her growing up. I'm not even gonna lie, I thought she was sexy as fuck. Now look what I did there. I'm not talking about the girl I'm on the date with. I'm talking about an actress that I used to like when I was growing up. But again, using those words with a certain delivery, it just implies I'm a dude who's more confident, I'm less in my head, I don't talk so much with a filter. And that's exactly what you guys need to start getting more comfortable with when you're in communication with the girl. And now I want to get into technique number 3, which is a little bit more subtle, nuanced concept. And it's actually telling the girl to not think about sex. All right, whenever you're trying to get somebody to think about something or do something, if you're trying to force the agenda into them doing it, it most likely leads to resistance. And the most common thing is telling somebody, don't think about a pink elephant right now. And by telling them to not do the thing, you're actually not forcing them to do it, but still the words hit in their mind and it forces them to think about the thing. So it's the same concept when it comes to technique number 3. So if things have already been building up between you and the girl, this is another great thing you can inject into it. If we're in conversation and we're talking about like her toxic traits or something she really likes, or what about me, you could hypothetically go into the negative and say something like, we would never be able to date, because it would end up just being this like toxic love-hate love-hate thing where like 1 month we're together and it's all like passionate and lovey-dovey, and then next month I'm like deleting you off of my social media. Now that is a hypothetical scenario where I showed no desire of sexual intent to the girl, but I'm kind of implying that it would happen. I'm telling her that it's not going to happen, but I say it could happen. Another very common one is if you're getting in closer to the girl or starting to get a little more intimate, it's like telling her to not do the thing. Like, stop giving me that look, you're putting naughty thoughts in my head. I'm trying to behave tonight. I'm trying to be a good boy tonight. And again, you're not just going to do that at the very beginning of the interaction. There needs to be some level of build up. And that's why number 3 is a little bit more subtle, nuanced, because you want to use technique 1, 2, and ideally there's been some flirting and some escalation building up, but technique 3 is a great one to also stack in to kind of bring more ideas of sex into the topic of conversation without directly showing the girl that's what you're thinking about. Another way girls actually do this sometimes, if you ever brought a girl home and maybe things were moving a little fast, by the time you get home, the girl might say something like, by the way, we're not having sex tonight. You know what that means? That means the girl's actually home and she's thinking about having sex with you tonight. That's what that actually means. That doesn't mean it's green lights and you should move it forward, but understand it's a very similar concept in the sense that she's telling you to not do the thing because she's thinking about the thing. So you can use this to your advantage and start to play that card before the girl plays that card. If you're going home, you could take the pressure off of the whole thing and say, hey, by the way, I'm just trying to chill tonight. I got work early. You know, we'll go there, have one drink, and just keep it chill. Nothing too crazy tonight. And ironically, by doing that, it actually lowers the pressure or expectation around the whole thing and puts you in a good position where something could potentially happen. Or if things are really escalating, we're kissing, we're making out, things are going further along in the interaction, another great way you could tease the girl or get her even more bought in to the idea of sex is telling her, this would be so hot, but we're not going to do that tonight. All right, that's another great way to imply technique number 3. So we're kissing her, she's touching here, we're talking about maybe clothes coming off, and you could talk in her ear and say something like, that would be so fucking hot, but I don't know if we're going to do that tonight. Let's just take it slow. Okay? I promise you, if you say something like that to the girl, it's like escalating the idea hypothetically, but then also saying, I don't know yet if we're gonna do that tonight. Let's just take it slow. It brings it into her mind. It almost makes it taboo, or that would be so fucking hot, or I would fucking love that, but we can't do that. That would be too naughty. All right, it just kind of depends on the vibe and the dynamic you're talking about with the girl, but these concepts are very powerful. It's escalating the idea sexually, but then also taking it off the table, taking the possibility of it off the table, and that allows you to actually get away with saying that thing without making it creepy. And lastly, guys, just remember that there needs to be this build-up in place. The only reason any of this is creepy is because you're saying it too abruptly when the temperature hasn't really cranked up enough. So you want to think about it like a volume knob. It's not just a light switch. I'm turned on, I say the thing. No, dude, it's a volume knob, and it starts out very slow, and you need to just ever so slightly crank it up, crank it up, crank it up, crank it up over the course of hours. Really, if we're talking about from the beginning of a date all the way to bedroom and closing, over the course of hours or even multiple dates, that's how you're going to create a really powerful result. So if you want to create more attraction, get more women, more dates, increase your social confidence, I can help you with that. Okay, I'm the guy for that. All you gotta do is click the link in the description, fill out an application for an opportunity to work with me personally. That's all for this video, guys. Peace out.